welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head, and in this episode, I'm talking to Gerard Blank. He is the Chief of Staff for Football at the University of Texas, Austin, after having a lengthy career coaching in the world of football. In 2018, he completed the World Marathon Challenge. This is doing 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days, and it was all to raise awareness for the International Dyslexia Association. As always, I'll put links to Gerard, things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Gerard.
Hey, thank you so much for having me and that introduction. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. What I thought I'd kick the show off with today really is your interest in sports. How did sports start to kind of grab your interest? Because not only are you clearly quite active personally, you're also working professionally in sports.
Yeah, so I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and at the time we had one real professional sports team. We had the Portland Trailblazers, which I followed as a kid growing up. I gravitated to sports right away, and really the community that it brings about, I think, is what excited me most about it. Is, you see a team win and what that does for a city, what that does for the people. And so that was kind of my first love. And then I was just one of those kids that just loved to run around and be active. So I think that's where it initiated from.
Oh, yeah. So you were quite an active kid, but I read in your profile that you found out you were dyslexic at 5 years old. So do you think sometimes running around and being active was a way of escaping or burning off some excess energy because class and school wasn't really working?
Yeah. So, I mean, it definitely wasn't, school definitely wasn't working. So I used to, and a little bit later in life than 5, but I used to put on my running shoes and go out the door to run, to really escape from the frustrations of school life and learning. And, I'd run until I couldn't run anymore, which at that time was usually just a few laps around the neighborhood. But it seemed to really help kind of get that energy out. And what I realized as I was going through school, and more kind of probably in the middle school era, I remembered this one night or afternoon, I was struggling with a math assignment. I couldn't get it. I had broken like 3 or 4 pencils in the process of dealing with this. I finally just went out the door and ran. And when I came back, I could do the math problems.
Yes.
And so something happened there where I was able to come back and concentrate and focus and have the answer. And so that running at that sense became kind of this tool for me.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I mean, I know with like creative minds, and I do sort of creative jobs, sometimes you think of stuff out of the situation where you're trying to think of it. So the removal of stress, maybe. But do you think there was something else with the sort of meditative nature of running and the fact you got to focus on just the cadence of it really helped you out?
I do. And I think there's some science behind it. I've read a little bit about it, like where it's going for walks or movement or kind of that meditation flow can allow ourselves that opportunity to kind of reconnect and then recalibrate and then come back in from maybe doing something that I didn't feel was kind of in my wheelhouse to being then able to do it. So I think there's some science behind it, but that, I still use the technique, getting up from the desk, going for a walk for even 5 minutes can kind of allow that creative spirit to come back.
Yeah, most definitely. And I sometimes find that you can get stuck in, should we say, the tunnel of you try and invest more and more energy and more time and more frustration into whatever problems ahead of you. And it's like, actually, what I need to do is leave and go somewhere else and then come back to it with a fresh mind.
So what have you found that's helpful in those moments?
So I will, because you can get sort of stuck into the detail with what I do. So sometimes you can overstretch the details. So what I tend to do, if it's something I'm struggling with, I'll look at the clock and will set myself like a 20-minute, half-hour timer, depending what's appropriate for the sort of complex of task I'm doing. And if I get to the point where I've not moved it forwards enough when it gets to the end of that, I'll either switch tasks or whatever I got on my work, or get up and go walk to the coffee shop or walk around the site or something like that and come back to it. But I find normally switching another task and picking it back up in the afternoon. But it's the discipline thing I find for me, because you can spin on a spot for hours, can't you? Just going round and round and round. Like, no. Here's a sensible time. Let's get up and get moving. Otherwise,
yeah, 1000%. I think it's it's so easy. I think, especially like you're conditioned to kind of like think to like keep going or keep striving at it. But the real thing that will actually be the unlock is doing something completely different. And it's been hard because I challenge myself with that all the time. Like, should I just put 5 more minutes in at the table, or is it actually get up and go move and see if we can't get a faster result?
It is, and sometimes I watching 80s action movies and the sporting heroes and all that kind of stuff, it feels like the relentless push is the thing you should constantly do, and actually that is sometimes the thing that's holding you back from solving whatever problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So you said you got picked up with dyslexia at 5, but how did you find out? What was the kind of mechanism that kicked in? Because it would have been a little while ago.
Yeah, super young age. And at the time, not much had been known about it. And I think my mom had really picked up on things that I was struggling with from a academic standpoint, just the little things that they have, whether you're using scissors or trying to draw within the lines. But the thing that was happening was they thought I was having some vision problems. So went to the eye doctor, got glasses. The glasses weren't really working. And we went back to the doctor, and she's like, I want to do a test with you. And so she does a test. And at that moment, she's like, okay, I'm going to get your mom. And I'd known probably, like, as little kids do, like something was off. And now, like, I'm caught. I always make the analogy. It's like, you've done something wrong and now you've been caught. And that's how it felt when I was sitting in this chair waiting for my mom to come in the room. But the eye doctor is the one who really thought that I had dyslexia. And, I'm really fortunate. I came from a family that was able to provide resources, and we were living in Portland, Oregon, and we were able to go to California to get the official diagnosis and start that process. And in going through this, I remember meeting with a doctor who said, having dyslexia and going through school is going to be like running with a cut on the bottom of your foot. It's going to be really painful and hard at times, but you need to know you can do it. And I don't think she realized how literally I was going to take her on that, but it definitely, that messaging really helped. And more so later in life as I reflect back.
Yeah, I could see that. That's really interesting. Is actually your optician that realized that you had dyslexia? It's not a route I was expecting you to say.
Yeah, well, she was like, I could see the board just fine. I just couldn't recognize what the letters were.
Of course, yes. So yeah, you could have had the strongest of eyewear on, and it still wouldn't have helped.
It still wouldn't help.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess also that kind of running with a cut on your foot analogy, being that you love running, really, really stuck with you, and you just kept sort of digging in when you needed to.
Yeah, and it's funny how it kind of keeps showing up. I had an injury in one of the races, and I remember talking to my coach, and he's like, and he could pinpoint exactly where the injury was and what it was. And I was like, how are you doing this over the phone? But, when that's your profession, I guess that's what you're able to do. Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, the good news is you can do it, because I had my 100-mile race and I had the same thing and I got through it. And so he's like, you can do this thing. And I just remember hearing that message and remembering what this doctor said. And it's always like, yeah, it's going to be painful. It's going to be really hard, but you need to know you can do it. And so those messages kind of keep coming back to me as I'm in this journey. And dyslexia is kind of like the ultimate endurance race anyway. So
really? Yeah, I suppose it kind of is. And I guess the drive and what you need in them situations when you've injured yourself on a long race, but you can get through it. It just evolves this mental kind of discipline, I guess, to keep moving. And that's the same with dyslexia in education sometimes, or even sometimes out of education.
Yeah, totally.
So, but you got through your education and ran with the cut on your foot, and you went to college and then university, all working within sort of sports and athletics. So were you putting any kind of things in place to help you rather than just, I guess, white knuckling it, realizing that you could just keep going? But was there any tools and stuff that really got you through?
Oh, yeah. So I think really important to identify, like, as I was going through middle school, high school, I had tutoring all the way through.
Ah, yes.
And that one-on-one education was super important for me. That was a tool that really worked well for me. It was really going to school, hopefully having to practice or something to break up the day. And then it was tutoring at night. So it was school on top of school. I wouldn't have been able to get through had I not had that. And I had in high school, I had extra time on tests. As I got into college, I had a note taker for class. And I was always, and I think like most young students I talked to, I was always like, do I use this? Do I not use the accommodations? Does it change what I'm producing? And that's a battle that I really try to let these current students know that are going through it. It's like whether you're using an iPad, whether you're using assistive technology, anything that's helping you put your best foot forward personally. Don't compare to anybody else. And you should use those tools. And so had like reflecting back again, I was in the same boat. I had the same thoughts, but it's like those things actually allowed me to put my best foot forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting actually, because I remember having the same kind of doubts when I was at school with anything from colored filters to whatever tool they were giving us. The iPads didn't exist then. But it's like, it's different. And I almost didn't want to be different, but
right.
I think your point there is very good, that actually you just need to get whatever gets the best out of you.
Yeah. And today, like even like audiobooks are really big for me. You know, back then they were audiobooks on cassette. And so you couldn't even like mark the space like when you like left off. And I would end up with my dexterity issues, I would end up breaking those tapes. Like the whole thing would fall apart. But audiobooks are great. I love those. Reader pens, I've found definitely advantages there. And then for me, and I know this doesn't work for everyone, but the dyslexia font is a real game changer for me. And I think it's important as we talk about like assistive technology and all these tools. It's really, there isn't one that fits everybody. It's really just playing around and figuring out what works for the individual. And for me, that font has been a game changer.
Yes. Yeah. I used to use it because Amazon Kindle supports it, which is really useful. I don't use it as much anymore, but I used to find it really useful at one point in time. Yeah.
I'm taking classes right now. I'm in grad school. And so it's super helpful for me as I'm getting through material.
Yes. The only thing you have to do is remember to flip the font back to a regular font when you get to submit your dissertation.
When you send an email. Very true.
Yeah, I used to send stuff in Comic Sans, so making that mistake.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So you managed to convert your interest, which actually you do sport and you have dexterity issues. How does that work?
Yeah. So, well, the joke in my family when I was growing up was if somebody opened up the car door and tied my shoes and I got to the soccer field, I was fine as long as, all those things happened. But it hasn't been the easiest thing, but it's something that I really love. I love being around sport and in sport environment. And, now with my job, I'm, working in collegiate athletics and it's been really cool to kind of allow what I'm passionate about and what I'm excited about on a daily basis to be what I get to do every day. And I think when you're doing something that you love and you enjoy, you're able to kind of work through those mental struggles, those hard things that may not come easy, but you're willing to put in the work. And that's why in talking to young people, I always say like, there's truly an advantage when you find what it is you enjoy doing, because let's say reading is a challenge. I always talk to parents about this. This is my parent example, but if reading is a challenge for your kid, but they love playing video games, build the reading around the video game. Teach, make the video game the thing. And then, okay, I want you to read about the newest game coming out, or I want you to read about the newest machine. And then what you can even do, you can take it a step further. You can teach them how to budget. Okay, if you're going to buy a machine in the next year, how much do you need to say? You can teach them through what they really enjoy doing because they've already had a vested interest.
Yes. The Trojan horse almost, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it really works. And so the trick is find out what they're interested in first, find out what they enjoy doing first, and then worry about the other things. Like make the other things the secondary.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I know when I was a kid, that was I could read motorbike magazines all day long, but reading the English
Right.
literature stuff was never going to happen.
Totally.
So you do a lot
Totally.
of work with youngsters through sporting as well as outside of that. So how are you finding the work with neurodiversity, and are you linking some of the work you do with sport into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm connected with the International Dyslexia Association. We have an Oregon branch back home. I've actually connected to the branch out here in Austin as well. So I do try to do those, keep those community efforts established, and then I also, being at the university level, you're seeing all sorts of students. So it does definitely apply. And I haven't fully, figured out how it all will work together, but it's definitely, there's some crossover for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And what sort of work are you pulling into the workshops when you're sort of linking back to people from Oregon?
It can be talks, it can be presentations, it can be connecting with students and parents just one-on-one, getting advice from somebody who's been on the other side of what they're going through. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, I think what I see from families is usually just they just need hope, right? From, once the diagnosis is there and it's like, what are we going to do and how are we going I think hearing from somebody who's can understand all of those concerns, but then has also been on the other side of it is a responsibility that I have, like to definitely give back in that way, because this community is really important, and we know when it like there's a stat out there that if dyslexics have a champion in their corner, that's what allows them to be, 70% of them will be successful just from that's that position alone. And so I definitely feel a responsibility to give back, because when they're not supported and when they're not given the tools from an education standpoint, we know how dangerous it can be for their path forward. And so that's just something that's always in the back of my mind, and it's exponential for people coming from marginalized backgrounds.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And that's really interesting stat. I'd not heard that one before, with just having somebody champion a dyslexic person really pushes them on to be successful. Cool. And how did you manage to turn your sort of interest in sports growing up into a career? What did it sort of look through as you stepped through university and worked through there?
Yeah, so I basically did a internship when I was going through college. I was fortunate. I was doing an internship with our sports medicine field at USC, and kind of was just kind of interning and feeling my way through. Like I knew I wanted to work in sports, but what I was going to do in that environment, I was kind of unsure of. I was fortunate. I was able to do an internship with the time it was called the Sports Authority, but it's now Sport Oregon, which is a nonprofit organization in Oregon that is responsible for bringing in large sporting events and doing sports within the community. So I interned with them, and that's kind of how I got my first introduction into it.
You're like, I want to stick around here for a bit longer.
Yeah, for sure.
And reading through quite a lot of your profile, you seem to have done a lot of work with football. Now, we established you're a runner, but where's the football bit come in? How did you get sort of gravitate to that particular sport?
Yeah, so yeah, and to reference, yeah, American football.
Yeah.
And it just kind of happened that they were looking for student assistants when I was interning in the athletic training room, and so I worked football one year, and then that led to an internship with our director of football ops at the time. So that would have been back in 2004, and did an internship there, and a full-time position opened up on staff the year I graduated. So 2 days after graduation, I was in an entry-level role working in the football office. So like
Oh, wow.
that's how it all kind of transpired. And what led me there was I had a running injury. So I was like, I wasn't able to really run. I was doing club at the time, and so started working in this training room, and that's that was kind of my path forward. And then football's just been something that I've like grown up in, I guess. Just and now I did 12 seasons before leaving to go run the World Marathon Challenge, and now this is year 2 being back in it.
Yeah. So you're now chief of staff at the University of Texas. So for people who don't know, what exactly does chief of staff do? How does that look as a day-to-day job role?
Yeah, so I look at that role as, or this role as, it's really you're supporting all the entities that touch the program, especially off of the field. You know, you're looking at it from the standpoint of the way somebody described a chief of staff is essentially like you're the central nervous system of the body. You're there to support all the entities that go into running the day-to-day operations, and so that's that's kind of the best way I can describe it. But it's helping with operations, and working with our operations team and player development and understanding what our video needs are, understanding the coach's direction, and then really we have such a great and amazing team. It's working to support all the outlets.
Yeah, I imagine sort of dyslexia is able to, with a dyslexic mind, you're able to kind of keep multiple threads going at once. So I imagine that helps a lot when you're kind of having to work through things like that as a chief of staff.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think I joke my party trick is I could, if I was sitting around the table just listening to everyone talk and I went up then I leave and go for a run, I could kind of come back and help facilitate a conversation that would lead to hopefully solutions.
Oh, right.
So I think dyslexia has allowed me to figure out how to connect things that where the answer isn't like really apparent. And that's kind of, I think, the opportunity that dyslexia has given me.
Yeah, yeah. And do you find that kind of quite useful when you're dealing with football? Is there quite a lot of things you're like, thinking pulls it in quite a lot?
Yeah, there's so many moving parts, right? And
yeah,
and so many things going when we were all pulling the same way. So it is figuring out how those things align and then working to help make those connections for sure.
Yeah, and how do you find the athletes themselves? Do you find there's a higher level of neurodiversity with your college football athletes? How's you finding that population?
Well, I think in general, right? Like I think athletes in general, like there tends to be more with that population and I think it's the same as like with, and this isn't on data by any means, but I whether it's artists or athletes or chefs or it's just generally those professions, there tends to be athletes in that sphere. I mean, notable athletes too, like Kobe Bryant, dyslexic, and Gary Payton Jr., who's playing with the Warriors, dyslexic. So it's just, you kind of see how that could all fit together.
Yeah, and I wonder whether, like what said with you with running, like whether you get really good at sports because other stuff isn't working either.
I mean, is that what allows it to transpire? Or I've always been curious about that.
Yeah, not sure. I don't know really, because you mentioned dexterity issues.
Yeah,
Easy word for me to say. So, like sometimes, dyslexia can have a mix of other neurodiversities, a bit of dyspraxia and stuff. And I remember as a kid having to throw balls back and forth to try and get some of my sort of skills up like that, which are skills that, if you're not great at, makes you not that great at some sports. So
sure.
It's an interesting thing. But I think listening to various sort of sport people and stuff with like the visual skills comes quite useful. Like Formula F1 champion Jackie Stewart used to say he was always visualizing 3 or 4 steps ahead of the car, and that sounds like dyslexic thinking coming into that. So I wonder if there's a lot more of that sort of skill set works in with a dyslexic brain and a sporting environment.
Yeah. No, that's always something that's like fascinating me because like I still, like I struggle with like, or I definitely as a kid struggled with the dexterity part of it. I think that definitely, we see it as like a reading challenge, but it can be so much more, right? the ability to put pen onto the paper, right? The idea might be there, but then you might have a full paragraph in your head, but you only write a sentence. Because I just think it's interesting. But I think what being in an educational environment, I'm more aware of it, and I'm more like aware of like what signs there might be. So if there are ways I can support people that I come in contact with, whether it be at work or working with the community at large, like, again, I always just want to be able to be a resource for people, and understanding that I know this challenge pretty well.
Yeah, most definitely. So that brings me on to your marathon, or marathons even.
Yeah.
7 marathons, 7 continents, 7 days. I think the first question is, where did that idea come from?
Great question. So in 2015, I remember this, I was sitting on my parents' couch, and I saw on ESPN somebody run 7 marathons in 7 days in 7 continents. And I immediately thought, oh, that's a race I was born to run. My mindset with it was like, okay, so I get up in the morning, I practice spelling with my mom, I go to school, I take my spelling test, I get picked up, I go to occupational therapy to work on some of the dexterity stuff and balance. I go back to school. I'm lucky if I have a break, a soccer practice or something, and then it was onto the tutors. And so like my days were really long, usually an activity, and then it would repeat. I eventually grew out of occupational therapy, but I was like, I can do long days. I love running. I've always used running. And right after college, I got into the marathon, 2010, I think I did my first marathon, but like, I just loved the sport of it. And so that's kind of where the concept came from. And in 2015, I think that was the year I did like 3 marathons in 2 months to try to qualify for Boston. And I thought, okay, I can do this. Like, it's possible. Now it took me, 2 or 3 more years to really dive into it, because it was until 2018 that I signed up. But that's where the idea came from.
Yeah. And then was it quite an easy link in your mind that you were going to do it to raise dyslexia awareness?
I knew I wanted it to do it for something bigger than myself. How that was going to happen, I didn't have no clue. So I quit my job in 2017 in the summer to go train for the World Marathon Challenge. And I then started kind of just reaching out to dyslexia organizations and seeing if there was ways that I could use this run as a tool to support, raise awareness, funds. And so I, was fortunate to connect with the International Dyslexia Association, and they connected me to the Oregon branch. I meet the president at the time. Her name was Jane Cooper, and they started working with me. And the funny thing about it was Jane is from South Africa, and one of the races of the World Marathon Challenge was in South Africa. And so she was actually there to see. But yeah, that's how that came about. So we were able to raise awareness and funds. We raised $50,000 for the International Dyslexia Association.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Now, how does prep for something like that go on? You mentioned obviously running more marathons, but that's quite a logistical thing. You've got to do 7 marathons in a row, which is brutal, I imagine, on the body, and get around all the continents and do it within 7 days. So there's got to be sleep deprivation, food deprivation, all this stuff coming as well as just a sheer mileage. So what sort of things were you doing to prep yourself for this big challenge?
Yeah. Well, it was fortunate. Like, I started training on my own when I first took on the endeavor. And then about a couple months in, I connected with an ultra runner. At the time, Yassine, who lives in Portland, started coaching me. And we kind of created strategies for that experience. It was, okay, let's fly across the country, run a couple, like there was this race in Pennsylvania. So I was living, in Portland at the time, go across the country. It's this running festival. So like, it was like 4 races over 3 days. And so I do that, then I fly back and we train the next week. So kind of trying to simulate it in the best way we could. I did the Las Vegas Marathon where I could fly in the morning of, race and then fly out that night and get back into Portland and then, train the next morning. So just to kind of experience what it was going to be like. Luckily, we had some snow in Portland that year, so I was able to go from cold to hot, by running inside and outside and kind of just trying to trick the body a little bit in terms of like what that experience might be. I did a marathon on the treadmill that year. So kind of just trying to do mental tests on, because it's a lot of it is a mental exercise, being able to move when you don't want to move. And so through Yassine and his group, the Weiss Wolfpack, was able to kind of have those experiences, which was super helpful for training. And then other people were super supportive within the community. I would train at a gym. I would, do yoga. Jamie King at the time had this Flex and Flow yoga studio, and she would be giving me yoga tips on what to do on the plane in between races. So like, so there was all sorts of things that went into that preparation.
Yes, that's a good point, is that you need to not seize up on the plane between marathons. And you were saying about the mental kind of side of it. Now, I mean, I'm not an endurance person by any stretch of imagination. Lift the weights faster is normally my idea of cardio. And but you mentioned the mental side of it, that I sometimes find if I'm doing something, and I don't know whether it's a trait being dyslexic visual thinking, you start thinking about other stuff and your mind goes off. But how do you, I guess, stay focused without getting so intense with it that you kind of monotonize yourself or notice any little ache in your feet, knees, whatever?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think there's a couple of ways. For me, it can be a mantra, right? Like I remember I was watching a video of another ultra runner, and they were like, "Yeah, when I'm in that moment of pain, I just remind myself I'm fine and I'll be fine." And I'm like, okay, so those like words can kind of help you through that zone. And then I remember listening to something else where a runner was talking about they focus on something that's feeling great. So like your legs may be really heavy. If you start focusing on your fingertips and you really dive into your fingertips, like, wow, your fingertips aren't in pain. So that allows you to like think about something that is not hurting. And so I am putting energy towards it. And so like those little kind of almost like assistive technology or, reading fonts or anything like that, it's kind of just having for me, it's having a bunch of tools in the kit to utilize, whether it's a couple words or whether it's concentrating on something that's not hurting, whether it's drinking a Coke in the middle of a race, like just something that's, tastes good and can get you kind of re-energized. So it's no different than I think being at a task. You're looking for ways to kind of break it up for yourself.
Yeah. And how, once you got into the races themselves, marathon 1 was probably okay, and flight 1 was probably okay. Now, as they roll through, what particular sort of highs and then lows did you have during the race itself? Just the ticking over. I bet by day 4 or 5, you're like, I am bored of marathon running and fed up at this point.
You would think. So everyone had like this like kind of this special quality to it. Like, I mean, the first one's in Antarctica. So like,
wow.
I was like, how cool is it to be running in Antarctica? So I was like super taken in that moment.
Were you chasing the penguins?
Yeah, you would think there was no life out there. The scientists in the bunkers that we were running next to, that was about as all the life we saw. I actually saw penguins in Cape Town, but
oh wow, cool.
Not Antarctica. But it was just being in that environment alone was a cool aspect of it. And then, the third marathon at mile 22, that's where I got hurt. It was in Perth, Australia.
Wow.
My whole leg was like locked up on me. And so part of like the next few races was, how am I figuring out how to work through this injury and still keep running, and still keep finishing these races. So I think I never really got bored. I was more like, I felt like I was exploring the whole time. Like, okay, can I get my leg to respond? Can I put music on that? Does that help me, drive through some of the pain that I'm dealing with? Like, and then as I was kind of navigating this thing, you're just moving marathon through marathon through marathon. And then finally you kind of get to, I remember getting to the half mile left of the race in Miami, which is the last one. And you're kind of like, you're almost sad that it's over. Cause like I've been on this journey of like, wake up, sleep on a plane, run, sleep on a plane, run again. And just, I thought it was such a cool way to, to live life for a week.
Yeah. So what did you do to your leg?
So it was an IT band that and that was what, as I was explaining earlier, that was what the coach was able to identify. It's like, oh, it's your IT band. It's strained, and it was kind of like 10-day injury. You just don't have 10 days to heal because you're running the next day.
Yes, I suppose a bit of ice when you stop running, and that's it. Next day, get up and run again.
Yeah, for sure.
So it was really just thinking about how you can run around the IT band being super sore.
Yeah, and just not getting that. I wasn't getting the normal rotation that you would get when you were striding. So I had to figure out, was it swinging the leg out wide at one point, just allowing that to be able to move. I finally in Miami, well, really in, I guess the race in Colombia, the one before, I learned I could plan it, and it was super painful to plan it, but that was giving me my best time. Like that was making me the most efficient runner, was planning it. And so I used that in Cartagena, I used that in Miami. I was able to run my fastest marathon of the week, the last one. And yeah.
Wow, really?
So
that's nuts.
Yeah. It wasn't always pretty, but and I think with dyslexia too, it's interesting because it's not always a pretty journey. And it feels messy all the time. And not all the time, I should say, but it can feel messy at times. And same with running. Running can be, you can have some of those amazing, most great runs, and then sometimes it's just gutting it out. And to me, that's just kind of how, maybe that's life in general, but it's definitely just showcased more with dyslexia and endurance sport.
Yeah. I think so. I think there is points to do with that. You could, that's a good analogy across that. Sometimes it is just grinding it out, or as you say, working out how to plant your foot and keep moving, even though it hurts like hell. Blimey. So each guest that comes on the podcast gets 3 rapid fire questions from me. They don't need rapid fire answers from yourself, but they're quick delivery set for myself. So let's dive into question number 1. What prejudice have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
That it defines you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty big one. Okay, question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
That's a great question. Am I able to converse with them? Are we speaking the same language?
Yes. Or they've got some way of understanding you, at least.
I would ask them to take the most challenging thing they've done.
Yeah.
And then I would say, okay, just imagine doing that 8 hours a day from the time you were 5 through 18.
Yeah.
And that is like life with dyslexia. And then after that, it just shows up at various times when you don't really expect it.
Yeah.
You have that same challenge, but it's not as bad after.
I heard somebody refer to it once as like when you're at school as dyslexic, you're being force-fed broccoli, and especially dislike broccoli as a kid. And then once you get out of school, you can eat more dessert. Right. And the final question is rapid fire set. And seeing this is called the Dyslexia Life Hack Show, what is your favorite dyslexia life hack?
That there's opportunities within it.
Yes. Cool. Right. Well, before we sign off, is there anything you'd like to add, and where can people find you?
So yeah, people can find me. I'm on social at Jared S. Blank on Instagram. I authored the book Running the Distance, which is, I believe, still available on Amazon, and all the sale proceeds actually go back to the International Dyslexia Association. We did it as a fundraiser.
Oh, cool.
And then my website, jaredsblank.com.
Okay, well, and I'll put links in the show notes as well. So that just leaves me to thank you very much for taking the time to come on the episode today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a fun conversation, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen. I will speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.